we want to start with a Docker Compose uh, YML file. So yet another modeling language file. So if we look at this file, use Vim, and the reason I'm doing all this from command line where I could do this in Notepad is typically in production or when you're dealing with live environments, you don't have a GUI. So you're going to have to either SSH in, FTP into, or SSH into your site so that you can actually work behind the scenes in the operating system. So we'll use Vim or Vi and go into our file and see what we have. So you want to start out by giving it the version of the Compose that you want to use, in this case 3.7. We're going to start out, we're going to set up our services. The first one here is going to, this is just a comment, so this is for our database. We're going to set up our database with a platform of Linux, x86_64. If you are on the Mac M1 chip, you must specify this. If you're on any other environment, this is not necessarily required. If you just specify Linux, it will just build a Linux environment. But for the M1 chip, this is the Linux emulator that Docker currently supports. So if you want to load Linux, make sure you have this one. Then we tell it what version of MySQL we want to install, in this case 5.7. We're going to tell it where to build our database volume. It's going to be in var lib MySQL. Restart always, so if we actually make any changes to the MySQL configuration, it will automatically cause a restart. We're also going to set our environment variables here. So we're going to set the root password as password, and we're going to set up a default database user and password for WordPress. And then for this example, it's all WordPress. Not what you want to do in production, but this is just a local development site. So this is what we need. And then networks, we're just going to dedicate it to a WP site. So that's our first container. So this is our database. Now, if you don't specify platform again, it will use this one by default for the rest of your containers in the same YAML file. So if we come down here, so next, it's not mandatory, but I highly recommend that you install the Phpmyadmin as another container. This will depend on the database settings. It's going to use the image Phpmyadmin. Again, we're going to set it to restart always if we make any changes to the back end. And here is where we actually specify the port. So where up here, we did not specify the ports for MySQL, so it's going to use the default. But here, we are going to specify the ports because these ports are the ports that are going to be open to our browser. So this is how we can actually access our website through the browser. So we're going to set up our PMA host to be our database. So it's going to go up to the database. And we're going to use the MySQL root password. So we're going to set Phpmyadmin to coincide, work hand in hand with MySQL. Now these are going to be running in different containers though, but this is really cool. So you can set this up and wire them together here. Again, you set to the same network, WP site. And then finally, we're going to set up WordPress. So WordPress, again, is going to depend on the MySQL database. Notice this is not pointing to Phpmyadmin. WordPress does not care about Phpmyadmin. Phpmyadmin is just a web-based database interface that you can use to work with any database. WordPress needs to point to a MySQL database. So here we give it our database reference. We're going to install the latest WordPress image, and we're going to specify its web ports to be 12,002. Again, restart always, and we're going to set its default volume to root var www html. And then we do need to specify the WordPress host, user, and password for default. So when it starts up, it knows how to log in and connect to the database. Network WordPress site, network WordPress volumes, DB data. Okay, any questions on the YAML file? Everyone clear? So there's our YAML. Exit out. So to bring up our Docker, we need to use the docker compose command again, but in this case, we're going to use the up command to bring up our containers and use the D for the current directory. So this will start, excuse me, this will start the download and the start downloading the images and run the containers for them. So this will take just a minute to run. And this pulls down those containers and the images in the order that they were defined in the compose file. So we start out by setting up the MySQL, then the Phpmyadmin, and then finally it will do the WordPress download and build. And as you can see, this is pretty quick. We're already on the WordPress, almost done. So much easier than having to set up a VM and then actually downloading the software, setting up the software multiple times. Or even if you were to create a VM master image file, you still have to maintain the updates to WordPress, to MySQL, to Phpmyadmin. So this is a very simple way to constantly build or update your environments without having to constantly go in and build a whole operating system and manage and configure. All right, so it's finished. Let's look at what we have. So if we look at our directory, here are all of our config files for WordPress. So we have our WordPress config, we have our WordPress content. We even have, clear this. So if we actually look, we also have our .ht access, which is hidden. We have our index.php, WordPress active. So we have all of our WordPress sites, including the htaccess file, which this will be necessary once we export our files, or I should say import our exported live WordPress site, because we're going to have to make a few changes locally so that the WordPress site works. Because there's some customizations in other environments that don't always work when you move them to different systems. All right, the other thing we want to make sure is, all right, so we know that we have our container. And so let's start and see what images were built. So we want to use Docker and the images command. And this is going to tell us that, hey, look, it's built us a WordPress image, a MySQL image, and a Phpmyadmin image. And and also because we did the Docker up, the container should actually be live. So if we use the Docker ef command, we can see that we do have 3 images running. We have Phpmyadmin, WordPress, and MySQL. They've all been up for 2 minutes. It also tells you the redirect for each of these. So if you forget, you can always run the Docker ps command to see which ports you need for Phpmyadmin. 1203 to support 30, and WordPress 12,002, 80, and MySQL port 3306. Now, 3306 is the default MySQL port, and since we didn't specify that in the YAML file, it automatically just defaulted to the default. So that is from the command line. Now, since we're on our local machines, if we go to our Docker desktop, we now see we have a WordPress container running. And if we expand out the container, we see that we have a WordPress database, we have a WordPress Phpmyadmin, and we have a WordPress WordPress site running. So WordPress is the overall container with the 3 different components. We have the database, the Phpmyadmin, and WordPress. If we want to go actually look at the logs for each of these, we can click on them and it will give you the command line logs, so you can kind of look through and see if something's going on. You can actually jump out to the command line for each of these. So now I'm actually on the WordPress box. I can, so that's from the WordPress container. If I want to go to the individual boxes, so I can go to WordPress DB, there's the WordPress database logs. I want to go to Phpmyadmin because Phpmyadmin also has a redirect to the web. I can also go and click here and just jump right out to the web browser. So very quick navigation within Docker. So you don't have to constantly remember, oh, where did I configure this? You can just manage everything from within the Docker desktop. And then WordPress, we can also click the link here and take us to our WordPress site. Up momentarily, and there it is. So the other thing to notice in our Docker desktop is we have this image tab over here. Now this is going to show you that we have 3 containers that have been downloaded and installed locally. We have WordPress, MySQL, and Phpmyadmin. Now it's saying that these are in use because these containers are currently running underneath this master container WordPress, and they all contain the volume for the WordPress database. So here is our database here. So any configuration changes we make to the container will be stored in this volume. Now we can create additional volumes and point to them as well. One thing to be careful of, if you do screw up and you want to start over, you must delete this file because these containers currently point to this volume. If you do not, if you just leave these images and don't delete the container or the volume, when you go to start again, it's going to start up and you're going to have all the same settings from your previous install. So it's going to still be broken. So if you need to start over, you need to delete everything. You do not need to delete the images though, because this will save you time. So the next time you actually run the Docker Compose up, instead of it downloading the containers, if these are the latest containers, it will reuse these when it builds your container application. Okay, I know that was a lot. Is everyone clear on the Docker desktop?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. All right, so now let's go set up our WordPress. So even though we are trying to restore a backup from a live system, it is so much easier to do it from within WordPress using the plugins. So we'll just quickly jump in and do a very simple WordPress install. We'll just call it demo, username demo, password demo, confirm leak password, and we'll just throw in my email address here and just search engines from indexing your site. When you are pushing this locally, you want to do this because you don't really want web browsers to try and find your site on your local machine. Install WordPress. This really doesn't take any time at all. Unfortunately, though, once you do this, you do have to go back in and tweak a file. We'll do that in just a second. Never. If we log in, demo, we now have our WordPress site. Do a demo. There you go. So if this is all you're doing, if you're just getting started with WordPress, this is where my presentation would end. However, we want to actually export our production and site, Malash Consulting, and actually import it into this local container. So the first thing I want to do before I do anything is come back over here to my Phpmyadmin and make sure that I can log in to this site. So do WordPress. Press, and I can. So I'm in my Phpmyadmin, so I can now connect to my WordPress database. We'll need this in case we need to update live URLs. All right, so the first thing we want to do is go to plugins now on WordPress. And we want to search for the all-in-one.